Heat radiating off the Georgia asphalt meant nothing compared to the slow-burning humiliation building inside the unmarked sedan. Aldred Parker, a decorated military judge with 2 decades of service, gripped the steering wheel as a county sheriff tapped his nightstick against the glass. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. It was a calculated display of power, steeped in prejudice. But Officer Tavion Grantham had no idea that the man he was illegally detaining was about to dismantle his entire career. Evening had just begun to settle over the sprawling pines of Oconee County, casting long, jagged shadows across the 2-lane stretch of U.S. Route 441. Inside his meticulously maintained 2018 Ford Taurus, Aldred Parker drove in silence. He was a man who appreciated silence. After spending his days presiding over tense, high-stakes military tribunals at Fort Stewart, the quiet hum of tires on asphalt was a welcome reprieve. At 48 years old, Aldred was a colonel in the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. He had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and had overseen some of the most complex courts-martial of the modern military era. His mind was a steel trap of case law, procedural regulations, and constitutional rights. He was out of uniform today, dressed simply in a crisp white button-down shirt and navy slacks, returning from a rare weekend visit with his sister in Athens. He had the cruise control set precisely to 55 miles per hour. His hands rested at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. He was the picture of lawful compliance. In his rearview mirror, a distinct set of headlights crested the hill behind him. Aldred's practiced eyes noted the silhouette of a police cruiser. He didn't tense. He had no reason to. His registration was current, his tail lights were functional, and his driving was impeccable. He maintained his speed, expecting the cruiser to eventually pass him. Instead, the cruiser accelerated, riding uncomfortably close to Aldred's bumper. Aldred's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He knew this tactic. It was a pressure maneuver designed to intimidate a driver into making a sudden movement or a minor traffic violation, drifting over the yellow line or hitting the brakes too sharply. Aldred did neither. He held his course, his breathing steady, his eyes flicking between the road ahead and the mirror. For 3 miles, the cruiser shadowed him. The intimidation tactic was glaringly obvious. Then, without Aldred having committed a single infraction, the cruiser's light bar erupted in a blinding display of strobing illumination. Aldred calmly activated his right turn signal, decelerated smoothly, and pulled onto the wide gravel shoulder, ensuring he left plenty of room for the officer to approach safely. He placed his vehicle in park, turned off the engine, and rolled down all 4 windows, a gesture of absolute transparency. He placed his keys on the dashboard and kept his hands resting clearly on top of the steering wheel. He knew the statistics. He knew the reality of being a black man stopped on a lonely rural road in the deep South. His military rank offered him no physical armor against a frightened or malicious officer with a firearm. In the side mirror, Aldred watched the driver's side door of the cruiser open. Officer Tavion Grantham stepped out. Grantham was a man who walked with the heavy, rolling gait of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority in a small jurisdiction. His uniform was tight across the chest, and his hand rested aggressively on the butt of his service weapon as he approached. Behind him, a younger, thinner officer, Deputy Brian Dawson, stepped out of the passenger side and hung back by the cruiser's trunk, looking uneasy. Grantham didn't bother using a flashlight to illuminate the interior. The fading twilight provided enough visibility. He stopped just behind the B-pillar of Aldred's car, a standard tactical position, and leaned in close to the window. "Evening, boy," Grantham said. His voice was a thick, gravelly drawl, dripping with an immediate, unearned condescension. Aldred's eyes remained forward, but he registered the racial slur masquerading as casual slang. He took a slow, measured breath. "Good evening, officer. Is there a reason you pulled me over?" "I ask the questions here," Grantham snapped, tapping his knuckles against the doorframe. "You were swerving back there, crossing the center line. You been drinking?" "I haven't been drinking, officer," Aldred replied, his voice calm, resonant, and meticulously polite. "And I haven't deviated from my lane. I have had my cruise control set to the speed limit." "Don't get smart with me," Grantham sneered, leaning closer. The smell of stale coffee and chewing tobacco wafted into the car. "I saw what I saw. Where are you headed in such a hurry? Whose car is this?" "I am traveling home to Savannah," Aldred answered, ignoring the deliberate provocation regarding the vehicle's ownership. "And the vehicle belongs to me. License, registration, and proof of insurance. And keep your hands where I can see 'em." Aldred did not immediately reach for his glove compartment. Instead, he narrated his actions, a survival mechanism he had unfortunately had to employ before. "Officer, my license is in my wallet, in my back right pocket. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. With your permission, I will reach for my wallet first." Grantham's eyes narrowed. He seemed frustrated by Aldred's unnatural composure. Men like Grantham fed on fear. Aldred was projecting only calm compliance. "Just get it, slowly." Aldred retrieved his standard Georgia driver's license. He consciously chose not to present his military identification. As a military judge, he believed deeply in the civilian justice system and the principle that all citizens should be treated with basic dignity under the law, regardless of their title. He wanted to see exactly how this officer treated an average civilian. Grantham snatched the license from Aldred's fingers. He looked at the card, then down at Aldred. "Aldred Parker, Savannah. That's a long way from home, Marty. What kind of work you do down there?" "I work for the government, officer." "Government work?" Grantham mocked softly. "Welfare office? Sanitation?" Aldred said nothing. His silence seemed to irritate Grantham further. The officer turned on his heel and marched back to his cruiser, license in hand. Through the rearview mirror, Aldred watched Grantham sit in the driver's seat, typing on his computer terminal. Aldred knew exactly what Grantham would find. Nothing. No warrants, no prior arrests, not so much as an unpaid parking ticket. His record was cleaner than the glass Grantham had just tapped on. Aldred's mind, trained in the rigorous logic of the law, began categorizing the interaction. Delaware vs. Prowse dictated that officers could not stop vehicles without reasonable suspicion of a crime or traffic violation. Grantham's claim of swerving was a blatant fabrication, a pretextual stop designed to fish for a bigger charge. 10 minutes passed. The delay was intentional, another psychological tactic. Finally, Grantham stepped out of the cruiser, but his demeanor had shifted. The casual arrogance had hardened into aggressive frustration. He stormed up to the window. "Step out of the vehicle, Parker," Grantham ordered, his voice raised. "May I ask why, officer?" Aldred inquired smoothly. "Have you issued me a citation for the alleged swerving?" "I said step out of the damn car!" Grantham shouted, his hand dropping back to his holster. Aldred knew the precedent of Pennsylvania versus Mims, which permits a police officer to order a driver out of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop for officer safety. But the stop itself had been unlawful. Still, arguing constitutional law on the side of a dark road with an armed, agitated officer was a fool's errand. The courtroom was the arena for that battle. "I am complying, officer," Aldred said clearly, making sure the dashcam audio from the cruiser behind him would capture his words. He slowly opened the door and stepped out into the humid evening air. He stood at his full height, 6'2", which seemed to take Grantham by surprise, forcing the officer to take a half step back. Turn around and face the car, Grantham commanded, his voice tight. Aldred turned, placing his hands on the roof of his Taurus. Officer, I am unarmed. I have consented to no search of my person or my vehicle. Spread your legs! Grantham ignored him, kicking Aldred's left foot to widen his stance. Grantham proceeded to conduct a highly invasive pat-down. His hands roughly patted Aldred's sides, down his legs, and up his inseam with unnecessary force. He emptied Aldred's pockets, tossing his phone, wallet, and keys onto the roof of the car. "What are you looking for, Aldred?" Grantham murmured, leaning in close to Aldred's ear. "Got some dope hidden in the car? Some stolen property?" "I have nothing illegal on my person or in my vehicle," Aldred stated. "Under Terry v. Ohio, you are permitted a brief pat-down of my outer clothing, only if you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I am armed and presently dangerous. Given that I have been fully compliant, what is your reasonable suspicion?" Grantham paused, stepping back. The legal terminology momentarily derailed him. His face flushed a deep crimson under the flashing blue lights. He looked over his shoulder at Deputy Dawson, who was now standing a few feet away, looking incredibly anxious. "You think you're a lawyer or something, boy?" Grantham spat, offended that a black man in his county dared to quote case law to him. "I am simply a citizen who knows his rights," Aldred replied evenly. "Well, out here, I'm the law. Dawson, bring me the cuffs." Dawson hesitated. "Sir?" "He hasn't—" "Bring me the cuffs, damn it!" Grantham roared. Dawson flinched, unsnapping his pouch and handing a pair of steel handcuffs to his superior. Grantham grabbed Aldred's right wrist, wrenching it behind his back with enough force to strain the rotator cuff. "Aldred Parker, you are being detained for resisting an officer and suspicious behavior." "I have not resisted," Aldred stated loudly, ensuring the microphone on Grantham's lapel picked up the statement. "I have complied with every physical command. You have no probable cause for an arrest." "Shut your mouth!" Grantham snapped, clicking the cuffs tightly around Aldred's wrists. He squeezed the metal ratchets until they pinched Aldred's skin, deliberately ignoring the safety lock mechanism. The metal bit sharply into Aldred's flesh. Aldred's face remained an impassive mask. He felt the cold steel, the throbbing pulse in his hands as circulation was restricted. But internally, his analytical mind was cataloguing every violation. False imprisonment, assault on color of authority, deprivation of rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Grantham wasn't just digging a hole, he was excavating a career-ending canyon. "Now," Grantham panted, shoving Aldred against the side of the car. "I'm going to search this vehicle. Dawson, keep an eye on this one." "Officer Grantham," Aldred said, reading the officer's name tag. "I explicitly deny you consent to search my vehicle. You have no warrant, no probable cause, and no exigent circumstances. Any search you conduct violates the Fourth Amendment." Grantham laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I smell marijuana, Aldred. That gives me all the probable cause I need." It was the oldest, most cowardly lie in the book of corrupt policing. Aldred did not smoke, nor had anyone ever smoked in his vehicle. The lie was entirely manufactured to bypass constitutional protections. "Dawson," Aldred turned his head slightly to address the young deputy, who looked pale and conflicted. "You are witnessing a fabricated justification for an illegal search. I suggest you note this in your own report." "Shut up!" Grantham barked, marching toward Aldred's driver's side door. For 20 minutes, Aldred stood awkwardly by his car, handcuffed, while Grantham tore through the Taurus. The officer pulled papers from the glove box, tossed the floor mats onto the grass, and rummaged through Aldred's meticulously packed overnight bag in the trunk. He found nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no contraband. Just a few legal pads, some civilian clothes, and a copy of a John Grisham novel. Grantham emerged from the vehicle, his chest heaving, his face a mask of furious disappointment. He slammed the trunk shut. "Nothing in there, sir?" Dawson asked timidly. Grantham glared at his partner. "He's good at hiding it, but we got him on resisting." "Put him in the back of the cruiser." Dawson approached Aldred, his eyes cast down. "Come on, sir. Please just step into the car." Aldred looked at the young deputy. "Deputy Dawson, correct?" "Yes, sir. You have a duty to intervene when you witness a fellow officer violating a citizen's constitutional rights. Your silence makes you complicit." Dawson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He gently guided Aldred into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the cruiser. I just do what he says, sir. Watch your head." As the cruiser door slammed shut, plunging Aldred into the stifling, cage-like interior, a profound stillness settled over him. The physical discomfort of his pinned arms and the tight cuffs was intense, but his mind was crystal clear. Officer Grantham had sought to degrade him, to strip him of his dignity on the side of a dusty road. But Aldred Parker was not a man who could be easily broken. He had stared down war criminals and insubordinate generals. A racist small-town bully was entirely out of his depth. Grantham climbed into the driver's seat, wiping sweat from his forehead. He adjusted the rearview mirror so he could lock eyes with Aldred. "You're going to learn some respect tonight, Aldred," Grantham sneered, shifting the car into drive. Aldred met the officer's hostile glare in the mirror. For the first time since the lights had flashed behind him, Aldred smiled. It wasn't a smile of fear or forced compliance. It was a cold, predatory smile of a grandmaster who had just watched his opponent willingly walk into a checkmate. "We will see, Officer Grantham," Aldred said softly. "We will see." The drive to the Oconee County Sheriff's Department took less than 15 minutes, but Grantham made sure every bump in the road was felt. He took corners sharply, intentionally causing Aldred, who was unrestrained by a seatbelt and unable to brace himself with his hands, to slide hard against the plexiglass divider. Grantham chuckled every time he heard the dull thud of Aldred's shoulder hitting the barrier. Deputy Dawson sat in their passenger seat, staring straight ahead, rigid and silent. "Gonna be a long night for your boy back there, Dawson," Grantham remarked loudly, ensuring Aldred could hear. "We get these types all the time. Think they know the law, think they can talk their way out of a holding cell. Nothing a weekend on a concrete bench won't cure." Aldred focused his breathing. "Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. He ran through the uniform code of military justice in his head, an old habit that kept him grounded. He memorized everything in his periphery. The cruiser's designation was Car 47. The dashboard clock read 8:42 p.m. He noted the route they took, the exact mileage. Evidence. It was all evidence. The cruiser pulled into the poorly lit back lot of a low cinder block building. The Oconee County Sheriff's Precinct looked exactly as Aldred expected, dated, underfunded, and isolated. Grantham parked and hauled Aldred out of the back seat by his biceps, offering no assistance as Aldred struggled to find his footing with his hands bound behind him. "Walk!" Grantham grunted, shoving him toward the metal double doors. Inside, the air conditioning was turned up high, smelling faintly of bleach and stale sweat. The intake room was dingy, dominated by a high wooden desk secured behind a layer of scuffed bulletproof glass. Behind the desk sat the shift commander, a heavy-set man with graying hair and tired eyes. His name tag read, Sergeant W. Foster. Foster looked up from a stack of paperwork as Grantham marched Aldred to the booking counter. "What do we got, Tommy?" Foster asked, rubbing his eyes. "Got a live one here, Sarge," Grantham announced proudly, leaning against the counter. "Pulled him over for swerving on 441. refused lawful orders, resisted detainment, suspect he was attempting to conceal narcotics, though we couldn't locate them at the scene. Foster frowned, looking at Aldred. Aldred stood tall, his posture perfectly straight despite his cuffed hands. His clothes were rumpled from the search and the ride, but his demeanor was entirely composed. He did not look like a belligerent suspect. "Resisting?" Foster asked, raising an eyebrow. "He doesn't look like he put up much of a fight." "He was verbally non-compliant," Grantham countered defensively, spouting off fake legal terms, trying to intimidate a peace officer. Foster sighed, pulling a blank booking sheet toward him. He looked at Aldred through the glass. "Name?" "Aldred David Parker," Aldred replied clearly. "Address?" Aldred provided his Savannah address. "You got ID on him, Tommy?" Foster asked. Grantham tossed Aldred's wallet onto the tray, and Foster pulled it through the slot. He examined the Georgia driver's license. "Occupation?" Foster asked, looking up at Aldred. Aldred met the sergeant's gaze. "I am an attorney, Sergeant." Grantham let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "An attorney? Sure you are, Artie. Probably chasing ambulances in Savannah, huh?" Aldred ignored him, speaking directly to Foster. "Sergeant Foster, I want to state, for the record, here in a monitored facility, that my arrest is entirely without probable cause. I was unlawfully stopped, unlawfully searched, and assaulted under color of authority by Officer Grantham. I request that my handcuffs be removed immediately, as I pose no threat to anyone in this building." Foster hesitated. He looked from Aldred's steely, unblinking gaze to Grantham's flushed, angry face. Foster had been on the job a long time. He could read people. The man standing in front of him did not speak or act like a typical arrestee. There was a quiet, dangerous authority radiating from Aldred that made Foster deeply uncomfortable. "Take the cuffs off him, Tommy," Foster ordered quietly. "Sarge, he's a combative—" "I said take them off," Foster repeated, his voice hardening into a command. "He's inside a secure area. We don't book compliant suspects in cuffs." Muttering under his breath, Grantham stepped behind Aldred and aggressively unlocked the cuffs. Aldred brought his arms forward, wincing slightly as blood rushed back into his numbed hands. Deep red indentations ringed his wrists, a clear physical record of excessive force. He made a point to hold his wrists up slightly, ensuring the precinct's surveillance cameras captured the bruising. "Empty your pockets onto the counter. Belt and shoelaces too," Foster instructed, following standard procedure. Aldred complied methodically, maintaining his silence. Once his belongings were catalogued and placed into a clear plastic bag, Foster motioned to a fingerprint scanner against the wall. "Over there, put your fingers on the glass." As Aldred was being fingerprinted, Grantham leaned against the wall, chewing on a toothpick. "You're real quiet now, counselor. Reality sinking in? You're going to be sitting in a cell all weekend until the magistrate gets in on Monday. Nobody cares what kind of fake law degree you have in here." Aldred finished with the scanner and walked back to the counter. He looked at Sergeant Foster. "I am entitled to a telephone call, Sergeant. I assume you will not attempt to deny me that fundamental right?" Foster nodded toward a heavy black rotary phone mounted on the wall. "Make it quick." Aldred walked to the phone. He didn't need to look up the number. It was burned into his memory. He picked up the receiver and dialed a secure line directly to Fort Stewart. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Staff Judge Advocate's office. Colonel Hayes speaking." "Richard, it's Aldred," Aldred said, his tone shifting instantly from civilian suspect to military commander. The change in cadence was so stark that both Foster and Grantham paused, looking over at him. "Aldred? Where the hell are you?" Colonel Richard Hayes asked, his voice laced with concern. "You were supposed to be back on base 2 hours ago for the briefing preparation." "I have been waylaid," Aldred stated calmly. I am currently being unlawfully detained at the Oconee County Sheriff's Department. I have been subjected to an illegal traffic stop, an unlawful search, and false arrest by an Officer Tavion Grantham." "Excuse me?" Hayes's voice dropped an octave, radiating immediate military fury. "Are you injured?" "I have minor lacerations and bruising from excessively tight handcuffs applied maliciously. Nothing that requires immediate medical attention. I am dispatching a JAG liaison and federal marshals to your location right now. Do not say another word to these local yokels, Aldred. We are pulling jurisdiction. They have no idea who they just locked up." "Understood, Richard. I will await their arrival." Eldred hung up the phone. The click echoed loudly in the quiet intake room. He turned slowly to face the two police officers. Foster was staring at him, a sudden deep sense of dread pooling in his stomach. Grantham, however, remained arrogant, mistaking Aldred's composure for weakness. "Who was that?" Grantham sneered. "Your mummy?" Aldred walked slowly back to the counter, ignoring Grantham completely. He looked directly at Sergeant Foster, his eyes hard and unyielding. "Sergeant, I highly recommend you preserve all dashcam footage, body camera audio, and surveillance video from the last 2 hours. If any of it goes missing, the Department of Justice will add destruction of evidence to the federal civil rights charges that will be filed against this department by Monday morning." Foster swallowed hard. "Who exactly are you, Mr. Parker?" Aldred finally reached into his pocket and pulled out the small black leather wallet he had kept hidden in his breast pocket, the one Grantham had missed during his sloppy pat-down. He flipped it open and placed it flat on the bulletproof glass. The gold badge of the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Beside it was a military identification card. "I am Colonel Aldred Parker," Aldred said, his voice ringing with absolute, crushing authority. "Presiding Military Judge, United States Army, and I'm advising you that my legal counsel and federal authorities are currently en route to this facility." Foster's face drained of all color. He looked from the gold badge to Grantham, who had suddenly stopped chewing his toothpick. Aldred turned his gaze to Grantham. The officer's smirk had vanished, replaced by a dawning, suffocating realization of the catastrophic mistake he had just made. Aldred smiled again, a cold, terrifying promise. "See you in court, Officer Grantham." The silence in the intake room of the Oconee County Sheriff's Department was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Sergeant W. Foster stared at the gold badge resting on the scuffed bulletproof glass as if it were a live grenade. The brass eagle of the Judge Advocate General's Corps reflected the harsh fluorescent light directly into his widening eyes. Officer Tavion Grantham stood frozen, the toothpick completely forgotten in the corner of his mouth. The arrogant sneer that had painted his face for the last hour slowly dissolved, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed expression of profound realization. He had not just arrested a lawyer, he had illegally detained, assaulted, and mocked a high-ranking military judge of the United States Armed Forces. "Colonel," Foster stammered, his voice cracking. He hastily shoved the booking paperwork aside, the sheets fluttering to the linoleum floor. "Sir, there has clearly been a massive misunderstanding. I had no idea who you were. My identity and my rank are entirely irrelevant to the violations of my civil rights, Sergeant," Aldred replied, his voice a calm, steady baritone that carried more threat than a shout ever could. "The Constitution does not apply conditionally based on the prestige of the victim. Your officer conducted a pretextual stop, manufactured probable cause, executed an illegal search, and utilized excessive force. The fact that I am a federal military judge simply means I have the immediate resources to ensure this department is held fully accountable." Grantham finally found his voice, though it lacked its previous thunder. "You were swerving, Parker. I saw you, and you refused a lawful order. Badge or no badge, you don't get to run the roads however you want." Aldred didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on Foster. "Sergeant, I strongly suggest you restrict Officer Grantham's access to any departmental computer terminals or evidence lockers. If the dashcam footage from Car 47 or the body camera data happens to become corrupted in the next hour, it will elevate this from a civil rights violation to a federal obstruction of justice." Foster swallowed hard. "Tommy," he said, turning to Grantham, his tone sharp. "Give me your keys now. Cruiser keys, locker keys, all of it." "Sarge, you can't be serious. You're taking his word over mine?" Grantham protested, his face flushing a mottled red as panic began to set in. "Give me the damn keys, Grantham," Foster roared, stepping out from behind the safety of the bulletproof glass. The sudden explosion of anger from the veteran sergeant made Grantham flinch. Grudgingly, Grantham unclipped the heavy keyring from his duty belt and tossed it onto the desk. At that moment, the heavy metal doors of the precinct swung open. Sheriff Calvin Reed, a tall, imposing man who had been hastily pulled from his home, stormed into the intake room. He was still wearing his pajama pants under his uniform jacket. "What in the hell is going on here, Foster?" Sheriff Reed demanded, his eyes darting from Aldred to Grantham. "The county dispatcher just got a call from the local FBI field office saying they're sending a team to secure a federal prisoner we're holding. Who the hell do we have in custody?" Before Foster could answer, Aldred spoke. "You don't have a federal prisoner, Sheriff Reed. You have a hostage." Sheriff Reed looked at Aldred, taking in the rumpled civilian clothes, the bruised wrists, and the unyielding posture. Then his eyes fell upon the gold military badge resting on the counter. The color drained from the sheriff's face just as rapidly as it had from Foster's. For the next 45 minutes, Aldred remained in the intake room, refusing Sheriff Reed's frantic offers to move him to a comfortable office, to get him coffee, or to arrange a quiet ride back to his vehicle. Aldred wanted to remain exactly where he was, a highly visible testament to the department's gross misconduct. He watched impassively as Grantham paced like a caged animal, whispering furiously into his cell phone in the corner. Deputy Brian Dawson had slipped quietly into the room, standing rigidly against the far wall, looking sick to his stomach. Then the cavalry arrived. Tires screeched in the back lot, followed by the heavy thud of multiple car doors slamming. The precinct doors were thrown open, and the quiet, stagnant air of the small-town station was instantly overwhelmed by federal authority. Leading the pack was Captain David Miller, a sharp, impeccably dressed JAG liaison from Fort Stewart. Flanking him were 3 men wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI across the back. Special Agent John Davies, a veteran civil rights investigator from the Atlanta field office, stepped forward, his eyes sweeping the room before locking on to Aldred. "Colonel Parker," Captain Miller said, snapping a crisp salute. Aldred returned the salute smoothly. "Captain Miller, thank you for making the drive." Agent Davies approached the counter, flashing his federal credentials at Sheriff Reed. "Sheriff Calvin Reed, Special Agent Davies, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are formally taking over jurisdiction of this incident under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 2422, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. You are to immediately release Colonel Parker into our custody. Furthermore, we are seizing the dashcam and body camera hard drives of Officer Tavion Grantham and Deputy Brian Dawson, as well as all dispatch audio logs from the last 3 hours." Sheriff Reed looked like a man who had just watched his house catch fire. "Agent Davies, this is a local matter, a misunderstanding. We were just processing his release. There's no need for a federal circus." "The circus is already in town, Sheriff," Davies said coldly. "We're just here to shut it down. Now, where is the server room?" As the FBI agents began systematically securing the digital evidence, Captain Miller stepped up to Aldred, examining his bruised and swollen wrists. "Are you all right, sir? Medical is standing by outside." "I am fine, David. Let's get out of here. I have a trial to prepare for, and unfortunately, it's my own." As Eldred turned to leave, surrounded by federal agents, Grantham couldn't help himself. Driven by a toxic mix of fear and bruised ego, he stepped forward. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin my life over a traffic stop? You people are always looking for a handout, a reason to cry victim." Agent Davies stopped, turning to look at Grantham with absolute disgust. But it was Aldred who spoke. "I am not ruining your life, Officer Grantham," Aldred said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "You ruined it yourself, the moment you decided your badge was a license for bigotry. I am merely the consequence you never planned for." With that, Aldred Parker walked out of the Oconee County Sheriff's Department, leaving a shattered precinct in his wake. The transition from a humid county jail to the polished oak and leather of a Savannah law firm was stark. 2 weeks had passed since the incident on Route 441. Aldred sat at the head of a massive conference table in the offices of Jenkins and Associates, a premier civil rights litigation firm. Aldred had chosen not to represent himself in the civil suit. As a judge, he knew the danger of losing objectivity when you were the client. Instead, he had retained Sarah Jenkins, a relentless, razor-sharp attorney who had made a career out of dismantling corrupt police departments. She was a force of nature in the courtroom, and she understood exactly what Aldred wanted. He didn't want a quick settlement. He wanted a public reckoning. "The FBI has finalized their preliminary investigation into the criminal side," Sarah said, projecting a series of documents onto the screen at the end of the room. "The Department of Justice is officially moving forward with federal indictments against Tavion Grantham for civil rights violations and battery. But that's their show. Our show is the civil suit against Grantham, Sheriff Reed, and Oconee County." Colonel Richard Hayes, who was attending the meeting in his civilian capacity as Aldred's longtime friend, leaned forward. "What did the dashcam footage show?" "It showed a slaughter." Sarah smiled grimly. She clicked a button, and the video from Car 47 began to play. The room fell silent as they watched Aldred's Taurus, driving perfectly between the lines. They watched Grantham tailgate him aggressively. They heard the audio of Grantham utilizing racial slurs, the unlawful commands, the fabricated probable cause of the marijuana smell, and the aggressive click of the handcuffs. "It's worse than I even described," Aldred noted quietly, watching his own illegal detainment play out on the screen. "It gets better, or rather, much worse for them," Sarah said, pausing the video on Grantham's furious face as he searched the trunk. "During the discovery phase, we subpoenaed Grantham's entire internal affairs file. Sheriff Reed fought it tooth and nail, claiming it was privileged personnel information. A federal judge disagreed. Sarah brought up a new document, a heavily redacted spreadsheet. Tavion Grantham has been a deputy in Oconee County for 9 years. In that time, he has accumulated 22 excessive force complaints, 18 of which were filed by black motorists traveling through his jurisdiction. 3 of those cases resulted in quiet, out-of-court settlements paid by the county, accompanied by non-disclosure agreements." Aldred's jaw tightened. "A pattern of practice. The department didn't just ignore his behavior, they subsidized it." "Exactly," Sarah nodded. Sheriff Reed knew exactly what kind of monster he had on a leash, and he kept putting him out on the highway to generate revenue through questionable traffic citations and civil asset forfeitures. But here is the real twist. Sarah clicked to the next slide. It was a sworn affidavit. "Deputy Brian Dawson," Sarah read the name at the top of the page. "The rookie who was with Grantham that night. The FBI interviewed him. Dawson broke down. He gave them everything. He admitted that Grantham explicitly told him they were pulling you over because a black man in a car that's nice out here is either dealing or stealing. Dawson also confessed that Grantham regularly fabricated the smell of marijuana to bypass the Fourth Amendment, and that Sheriff Reed encouraged deputies to target out-of-county plates. "Dawson is breaking the blue wall of silence," Colonel Hayes murmured, impressed. "He's terrified," Aldred corrected gently. "He's a young man who realized he was sitting in the passenger seat of a sinking ship. I told him that night his silence would make him complicit. It appears he listened." The intercom on the conference table buzzed. "Ms. Jenkins, the legal counsel for Oconee County is on line 1. They're asking if we are open to mediation." Sarah looked at Aldred, raising an eyebrow. "Well, Colonel, they're terrified. I guarantee they are about to offer a 7-figure settlement to make this go away quietly. They want to bury the IA files and keep Dawson's affidavit out of the public record." Aldred stood up, walking over to the window that overlooked the sweeping marshlands of Savannah. He thought about the 22 other people who had been pulled over on that dark road. People who didn't have a JAG badge. People who didn't have the FBI on speed dial. People who had been terrified, humiliated, and forced to sign NDAs just to put their lives back together. "Tell them," Aldred said, turning back to the table with a gaze as hard as granite, "that Aldred Parker doesn't mediate with bullies. Tell them I reject their offer, whatever it is. And tell them to prepare for trial." Sarah Jenkins grinned, a predatory flash of teeth. She pressed the intercom button. "Margaret, please inform opposing counsel that we decline mediation. We will see them in federal court." The trap had been completely sprung. Grantham and the corrupt machinery of Oconee County had picked the wrong man on the wrong night. Now, the full, devastating weight of the law was coming down on them, and Aldred Parker was going to ensure that every dirty secret they had was dragged into the blinding light of a federal courtroom. The trial of the decade was about to begin. Inside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta, the air was heavily conditioned and thick with anticipation. 9 months had passed since the unlawful detainment on Route 441. The civil trial of Parker versus Grantham, Reed, and Oconee County had become a media sensation, drawing journalists from across the nation. It was a rare, microscopic look into the systemic failures of rural policing, spearheaded by a plaintiff who possessed both the legal acumen and the iron will to see it through to the bitter end. Aldred Parker sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit. His posture was, as always, immaculate. He projected the quiet authority of a man entirely in his element. Beside him, Sarah Jenkins reviewed her notes, her pen moving with predatory grace. The defense table was a portrait of crumbling confidence. Tavion Grantham sat rigid, stripped of his badge and uniform, wearing an ill-fitting brown suit that made him look small and unremarkable. Beside him was William Hastings, an expensive, high-powered defense attorney hired by the county's insurance provider. At the far end of the table sat Sheriff Calvin Reed, sweating profusely despite the cool temperature of the courtroom. Hastings had spent the first 3 days of the trial attempting to paint Grantham as a proactive, if overly zealous, peace officer who had made a regrettable but honest mistake in the heat of the moment. He tried to argue qualified immunity, claiming Grantham reasonably believed he was acting within the bounds of the law, but Sarah Jenkins was systematically dismantling that defense, brick by constitutional brick. The pivotal moment of the trial arrived on Thursday morning. Jenkins called her star witness, Brian Dawson. Dawson, no longer employed by the Oconee County Sheriff's Department, walked to the stand with a nervous gait. He swore his oath and took a seat, refusing to meet the glaring eyes of Grantham or Sheriff Reed. Jenkins approached the podium. "Mr. Dawson, could you please recount for the jury the exact words Officer Grantham used when he initially spotted Colonel Parker's vehicle?" Dawson took a shaky breath, gripping the edges of the witness stand. He pointed at the car. He said, "Look at that out-of-town tag. A black man in a vehicle that expensive out here is either dealing narcotics or stealing it. Let's go hunting." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The raw, unfiltered bigotry spoken aloud in the solemn federal courtroom was shocking. Hastings immediately objected, citing hearsay, but Judge Harold Beck overruled it. The statement was an admission by a party opponent and central to the motive. "Did Colonel Parker's vehicle ever cross the center line, Mr. Dawson?" Jenkins pressed. "No, ma'am," Dawson answered softly. He maintained a perfect lane of travel. "And the smell of marijuana that Officer Grantham claimed provided his probable cause for a search?" Dawson shook his head. "There was no smell. He made it up. He told me earlier that week that claiming you smelled marijuana was the easiest way to bypass a judge and get into someone's trunk." Hastings brutalized Dawson on cross-examination, accusing the young man of lying to secure a plea deal with the FBI and save his own skin. He painted Dawson as a weak rookie who couldn't handle the rigors of law enforcement. But Dawson held firm, his testimony corroborated by the dashcam footage that showed no erratic driving whatsoever. The true climax, however, came when the defense made the fatal error of putting Tavion Grantham on the stand. Grantham swaggered to the witness box, attempting to project the same unearned authority he had wielded on the side of the highway. Under Hastings's gentle questioning, Grantham claimed he felt threatened by Aldred's evasive legal language and insisted he genuinely believed a crime was in progress. When it was Jenkins' turn to cross-examine, she did not approach the podium immediately. Instead, she let a long, uncomfortable silence stretch across the courtroom. She stared at Grantham until he shifted nervously in his seat. "Mr. Grantham," Jenkins began, her voice carrying a deceptive warmth. "You testified earlier that after realizing Colonel Parker's identity at the station, you were solely concerned with rectifying the misunderstanding. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Grantham replied tightly. "I realized a mistake had been made." Jenkins walked over to her evidence table and picked up a transcript folder. "Do you recall making a phone call from your personal cell phone while Colonel Parker was being held in the intake room?" Grantham's face paled. I make a lot of calls. I don't recall specifically." "Let me refresh your memory," Jenkins said, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, Plaintiff's Exhibit 42. Audio retrieved by the Federal Bureau of Investigation via a subpoena of Sheriff Reed's personal voicemail." Sheriff Reed practically jumped out of his chair at the defense table. Hastings launched into a frantic objection, but the evidence had already been cleared in pre-trial discovery. Jenkins clicked a remote, and the courtroom's audio system crackled to life. Grantham's hushed, panicked voice filled the room. "Calvin, it's Tommy. Pick up. Look, we got a major problem at the station. I pulled over that black guy on 441 like we talked about, the quota thing. But he's a damn military judge. Jag, he's got the feds coming. You need to get down here, and we need to wipe the server right now. The dashcam is going to bury me. Call me back." The silence that followed the recording was absolute and suffocating. The jury box looked as though they had just witnessed a murder. Grantham sat in the witness stand, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Sheriff Reed buried his face in his hands. "Mr. Grantham," Jenkins said, her voice dropping all pretense of warmth, turning sharp and lethal. "Did you just commit perjury in this federal court by claiming you made an honest mistake, when your own voice proves you were engaging in a racially motivated quota scheme and attempting to destroy evidence?" "That was taken out of context," Grantham stammered, sweat pouring down his temples. "No further questions, Your Honor," Jenkins said, turning her back on him in absolute dismissal. She walked back to her seat and sat down next to Aldred. Aldred didn't smile. He simply watched the man who had tried to strip him of his dignity completely unravel on the stand. The checkmate was complete. The jury deliberation was practically a formality. It took them less than 4 hours to reach a unanimous decision. When the foreperson stood to read the verdict, the courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. They found in favor of the plaintiff on all counts: false imprisonment, assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and gross violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments. Then came the damages. The jury awarded Aldred Parker $2 million in compensatory damages. But it was the punitive damages that sent a shockwave through the legal community. Designed specifically to punish and deter egregious misconduct, the jury hit Tavion Grantham, Sheriff Calvin Reed, and Oconee County with a staggering $12 million in punitive damages. Hastings dropped his pen. Grantham buried his head in his arms and openly wept. Sheriff Reed stared blankly at the mahogany table, realizing his career, his pension, and his freedom were entirely gone. As the judge slammed his gavel, dismissing the court, the immediate aftermath began to unfold. The civil victory was only the first domino. Armed with the devastating evidence presented in the civil trial, particularly the voicemail recording, the Department of Justice accelerated its criminal proceedings. 2 weeks later, Tavion Grantham stood before a federal judge and pleaded guilty to deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Sheriff Calvin Reed didn't fare much better. The revelation of the quota scheme and his complicity in covering up systemic civil rights abuses led to a federal indictment for conspiracy. He was forced to resign in disgrace and eventually pleaded down to a lesser charge, spending 3 years in a minimum security federal facility. The Oconee County Sheriff's Department was placed under a massive federal consent decree. The DOJ mandated sweeping reforms, forcing the department to rewrite its use of force policies, implement strict racial bias training, and submit to regular external audits. Brian Dawson, having provided the crucial initial testimony that cracked the corrupt foundation, was quietly relocated. With a letter of recommendation quietly penned by a certain military judge, Dawson eventually found a position in a specialized, highly regulated state investigative bureau, where integrity was valued over a fraternal wall of silence. Through it all, Aldred Parker remained an unmovable pillar of stoic resolve. He accepted the settlement money, but didn't keep a single cent of it for himself. Instead, he established the Parker Foundation for Constitutional Defense, a non-profit legal fund dedicated strictly to providing aggressive, top-tier legal representation for marginalized citizens who were victims of police misconduct in rural jurisdictions. 6 months after the trial concluded, Aldred stood in his dress uniform, a crisp, dark green, adorned with the heavy weight of his medals and the gleaming gold badge of the Judge Advocate General's Corps. He was standing at the podium in a sprawling lecture hall at the United States Army War College in Pennsylvania, preparing to deliver a lecture on the intersection of military justice and constitutional law. Colonel Richard Hayes stood at the back of the hall, watching his friend with immense pride. "Before we begin our analysis of the Uniform Code," Aldred projected, his rich baritone easily reaching the back rows of the packed auditorium, "we must first acknowledge a fundamental truth about authority. The uniform you wear, the rank you hold, and the badge you carry are not shields behind which you can hide your personal prejudices. They are a profound, heavy burden of public trust. When that trust is weaponized against the very people we are sworn to protect, it is not merely a violation of law, It is a desecration of the American ideal. Aldred paused, looking out over the sea of young officers, future leaders who would carry the responsibility of justice into the next generation. The law is not a weapon to subjugate, Aldred continued softly, but with a resonant intensity that demanded absolute attention. It is a shield to protect, and when the guardians of that shield become the aggressors, they will find that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends relentlessly and unforgivingly toward justice. He nodded slightly, stepping back from the microphone. Now, let us turn to page 1. The courtroom drama had ended. The corrupt had been excised, and Aldred Parker had returned to the only thing that truly mattered to him: the quiet, rigorous, and unyielding pursuit of justice, holding the line, ensuring that the law remained a promise to all, rather than a privilege for a few. What an incredible journey of justice and accountability. This story goes to show that power and corruption can never outrun the blinding light of the truth, especially when they mess with someone who knows the law inside and out. Colonel Parker's unyielding composure and absolute dismantling of a corrupt system are truly inspiring. If you were captivated by this intense, real-life inspired legal drama and want to hear more stories of everyday heroes standing up to bullies and fighting for what is right, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends to spread the message, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling narratives. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the Colonel's brilliant checkmate